So if you look at a carpenter, they have toolbox. Dentists, they have their drill. In this era and type of work we are actually doing, the tool we need most is to give and receive feedback well. Is centered around to be able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about feedback, how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we are still pretty bad at it. Recent Gallup survey found only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get improves their work. This number is pretty decimal, so what's going on? The way most people give feedback actually isn't brain friendly. They fall into one of two camps. Either they are of the camp that is too very indirect and soft, that the brain doesn't even recognize that the feedback is being given, or it's simply confused, or they fall into the camp of being too direct. It tips the other person into the land of being defensive. There is this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we will move forward defensiveness, or we will move backwards and retreat. And what happens is that the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add many and justifications, and the whole thing gets pretty wonky fast. It doesn't have to be that way. I and my team have spent many years going to different companies and asking who here is the great feedback giver, and anybody who was named again and again, we actually bring into labs and see what they are doing differently. What we find is there are 4-part formula that you can use to say difficult messages well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. First part of this formula is what we call a micro yes. The great feedback givers asks a question that is short but important. The great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that the feedback is actually coming. It could be a question, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how the last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? These micro yes questions does two things. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets you know that the feedback is about to be given. Second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. Then I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There is a concept that we call blur words. Blur word is something that could mean different things to different people. Blur words are something that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see the great feedback givers doing differently is that they will convert their blur words into actual data point. So for example, instead of saying, you aren't reliable, you could say that you said you would get that email to me by 11 and I still don't have it. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is you want to be able to specify exactly what you want them to increase or diminish. If you stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue, particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. Third part of feedback formula is what we call impact statement. Here you should name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, because I didn't get that message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me to grasp the concept faster. It gives you a sense of purpose, meaning, and the logic between points, which is something that the brain really craves. Fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. So they ask a question like, well, how do you see it? Or this is what I'm thinking we should do, but what are your thoughts on it? What it does is that it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But here is one thing. Great feedback givers not only can say difficult messages well, but also they ask for the feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows you shouldn't wait for the feedback that is given to you, what we call push feedback, but you should actively ask for the feedback, what we call bullying feedback. Bullying feedback does establish you as a continual learner and puts a lot of power in your hands. So the most challenging conversation are the ones that call for the most skillful feedback, but it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know 4-part formula, and you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversations.